tricky. Right, so I'm going to be talking about accessible storytelling, and I am Alastair, and yes, the reason why people come across me on Twitter is because I tweet much. So if you do need to find me, that is the best place to find me. And what I'm going to talk about now is a story. So I'll give you a story, and it's a story about a story. And it's a discussion of why stories go wrong. And it's a discussion of why stories go wrong, particularly in accessible terms. So, last year, I was approached by the Imperial War Museum. And obviously, the Imperial War Museum, I've been working on a project for refitting the Hospital building for about 3 years. So, 2 months before they opened, they approached me, because that's accessibility for you, that they had a hole. Their designers had a hole in their gallery design, which was this, a tactile map of the World War I gallery. So they wanted a tactile map, and most of my work is in sensory design. I convert visual or other information to other modalities, so visual to tactile, to sound, to smell, to whatever. And so they wanted a tactile map of the World War I gallery. And it's slightly tricky, because of course the place doesn't exist yet. It only exists in design imagination, and no person has ever walked it, so it doesn't exist in that sense. And of course, when you're working tactile, when you're working with projects which are funded by the government, they're wanting stuff that lasts. And my user faces, so when I work in designing stuff, my user faces are literally steel. We cast our interfaces, and they have to last for 25 years. So you have to make a few choices when you're making an interface which you know is going to last for 25 years. And so this is a story about how we made choices in the Imperial War Museum. Now, the gallery is quite a simple experience. This is it. It's a C shape. And it's also relatively easy to understand how it works. So you come into the Imperial War Museum, you come down a staircase towards the gallery. On your one side is the cafe, which is full of smells and conversation and all of that sort of thing. And on the other side, you've got the information desk, which is that sort of desperate, quiet queuing. And in front of you is the World War I gallery. And you're moving through light, you're moving through space, and then the World War gallery is dark. And it's low, and there's no natural light. And more than anything else, it's an odd journey, because you go in, one entrance, and you come out, one exit, and you go round, and there is no way of going backwards or forwards. Well, you can only go forwards, actually. You can't go backwards. The crowds mean that you can't go backwards. The design of the place means you can't move backwards. You can only go forwards. You're in a narrative which you can only move forwards. And so they've chosen the fairly obvious temporal system. We're all moving through space. We're all moving through time. So therefore, you know, it's a fairly obvious organisation. Start a war, end a war. And that's nice. And it's a fairly obvious one. And then they throw content at it. And they've got a lot of content. They've got stuff. They've got bits and bobs of tanks and aeroplanes and uniforms and sound and smells and stuff. And they throw it at the environment. And again, they realise, and this is good, they realise that's quite difficult. So they impose a narrative. And so they create, and I got copies of the narrative, which showed that they'd broken it down into 12 chapters. And again, that's nice. So they've got a structure. They've got an idea that they've got too much content. They've got too much stuff. So to make it comprehensible, to make the narrative understandable, you have 12 chapters. And you're moving through that chapters. And that's lovely. But there's a problem with the idea that they've designed these chapters. There's a problem with the fact that they think they've done something with the architecture of the information. It's invisible. So this is during fit out. They've created chapters, they've created a narrative, they've created a story, and that's all fine. But if you actually pass through the physical environment, none of it's possible to perceive. You cannot tell there is a storyline. You cannot tell there's a narrative there. There are clues, but for reasons best known to themselves, they don't actually tell anyone. So there is use of colour and there is use of texture, but nobody tells anyone. So they've implemented a whole design of a place where they've created a narrative, they've created chapters, and then they don't bother telling you. So instead of having this nice idea of an architecture of a place where you're moving through chapters, you're moving through a storyline which is all clear and simple, you're actually moving through a blob. You're back to the blob of an architecture of just a single narrative. You know you're in a narrative, but you can't actually find your way through it. You can't find any meaning in it. And coming from accessibility, this is the problem. This creates stress. Because, again, think of the place. We're talking about a place where there is one entrance in, there is one entrance out, so you can only move forward. You're in a place with only unknown natural lighting. It's stressful. You know that you're in a narrative which has to be followed. The narrative creates pressure. And this is okay if you're neurotypical. I'm very happy. But for people with autism, for people who have got lower self-control systems, so for people, even for people, say, who have got 2 children who really aren't wanting to be there, or people who have just had half a bottle of wine in the restaurant, all of these people have got lower self-control. So this narrative, this sense of content, this sense of place, is actually pushing down on them. Because the more content you shove at people, the more it takes away from their ego, the more it takes away from their self-control. So you actually create places which stress people out. And when they're stressed out, they become angry, pissed off. It's not a happy place. And again, remember, there's only one entrance and one exit. So you've got people halfway through this experience who are going to be very unhappy, and very unhappy in front of crowds of people. And so this is narrative as horror. This is the use of narrative by people who don't understand why they're using narrative. Because people, particularly in museums, narrative is very fashionable nowadays, because it's a way of organising information which seems clean. It seems good, because it allows you to use the trick, which is narrative. Because narrative is a very clever trick. It's an attentional trick. Because we're designed to look at information, uncontextualised information, whatever, and we're supposed to, we sort it. But narrative is a clever way of tricking that, because it makes things which you, personally, don't think are related. So it makes you think that that gas mask over there is in fact related to that piece of uniform over there. It creates a sense that you have to comprehend all the elements, and you're passing through it. And that's an interesting trick. And it works, and that's why people do it. But it's not a thing you should do. Because narrative creates a demand. And generally we don't see the narrative demand because we don't generally end up in a small windowless room in South London that often, I hope. But it does. Because generally when you have a narrative, if you go into a bookshop, you see books. Books have narratives. And books you can choose. You can say, I wish to take this, I don't wish to take this. But when you're within this narrative like this, a narrative which is filled in space, a narrative which is moving through time, a narrative in which you are physically embedded, then the choice is going. And that creates issues. And it creates these stresses. And this is what I have against narrative in the sense of accessibility. Because it's building pressures, it's building demands on an individual without them having the ability to say no. So, to come back to accessibility, and sort of some of the ideas which we were using last year. One of the key ones is accessible is perceivable. Coming back to the story, I mean, sort of the idea that there are chapters in this place. The problem with the chapters which were in the place was they were invisible. You couldn't perceive they were there. All you could see was the fact that you were looking at a physical space which you were passing through, a physical space of narrative, a physical space of content, and you couldn't see where you were in it. You were just in it. Accessible is intelligible. Intelligibility is actually more interesting than comprehension, because comprehension is what's the hospital about accessibility. Intelligibility is The idea that I am anticipating comprehending the place I'm going into. It's all about that leaning forward. That, you know, human beings, we're always leaning forward into the imagination of the anticipation of things. And intelligibility means that I can actually be aware that this is a place that I will be able to understand. It will be comprehensible. Without intelligibility, people just rebound, people will push away. And accessible is mutual. The idea that you should enable people to have a choice. They must be able to say, this is something I can move through independently. This is something I can move through with my own sense of control. So, what did we do? So we did something fairly simple. The map does three things. The first one is it actually just tells people you are about to enter a space where there is only one entrance and one exit, and you will have to go through. And there are hard walls. One of the concepts which shows up in accessibility sometimes is the softer the perception of people, the harder the design needs to be. You need to be actually showing things people hard edges, because their perception capability is lower. It's a concept I find mildly uncomfortable, but it's interesting. But yeah, so that priming people to understand that they are going to go into an experience which may, probably about halfway through, be a bit tricky. Priming people to understand that there is a comprehensible theme, that the invisibility of the story, the ability to find the place intelligible is possible. So pre-war, war, home fronts, the one in the middle, and post-war. That you're priming people to understand that there is basically an intelligible design. The thing which you couldn't see, the thing that you couldn't understand, the storyline, is there, and we can actually explain it to you. And finally, we explained where the seats were. And actually, this is the most important thing. The seating areas is the thing which we actually designed. And this is what the map is, and we've never told the client, please don't tell me for a reason. The gap is actually what the map is. It's a map of gaps, because the map's actually attempting to show people why gaps matter. And this is actually really where this top thing's going. Gaps matter because gaps are where people have personal control. You see, when you're creating content, when you're creating an architecture of information, when you're creating narratives, all these things, what you actually need to leave is a place for the person. A place for their ability to understand, a place for their ability to use their imagination, a place for them. If you just have infinite content, infinitely laid out, all the time, that's where things become a problem, because there's no space for them. And gaps are self-control. So, in terms of the seating areas, the reason we put in the seating areas was enabling people to understand where they could take a break. So when you're moving through a space and you're stressed by it and you're, whatever, overwhelmed, being able to have a nice sit down is quite important. Generally in museum design, that's where we point out where the cafe is. In this circumstance, there were no exits, so we couldn't do it. So therefore, the only thing we could do was point out where the seats were. So the ability to recover self-control, the ability to actually bring yourself back, is actually quite good. Human beings are quite good at it. But they need to find the place to do it. They need to find the gap. And that's what gaps matter for. And the thing is, we've forgotten why gaps matter in design, and why gaps, and I'm not just talking about white space specifically, but the idea that gaps exist, used to exist quite easily. We used to understand it, because it was in books. We used to have a space in a book where the end of a chapter occurred, and then the beginning of the next chapter occurred. And that's where you went for a coffee break. That's where you went to eat. That's where you had a chat with people who were around you. The gap existed so as to allow you to regain yourself, to regain your moment. Because you shouldn't have content, you shouldn't have narratives where it's all about the provider. You have to have narratives where the user can be put, where they can find themselves. And I have to say, I didn't actually realise this was all about architecting happiness, but we have a random happiness moment here. Gaps are actually good for happiness. Because if you look at some of the research, I mean, sort of the Dolan, whatever, research, where people make better decisions when they've had a mass of content, they've had a mass of information, and then they have a moment where they can do a Sudoku. They can watch cat videos. Cat videos are really important in life. These moments, these breaks, are actually allowing the subconscious to be able to process, and then allow people to make decisions, make them to be able to do something. And the decisions, they may not be better decisions, but they're more contented decisions. They're happier decisions. Because you've allowed the person to actually have self-control. You've allowed a moment in the existence of the narrative where the person can be. And that's why they're happy. And also, again, it's relatively forgotten, gaps are creative. Because gaps, if you look at the sensory systems, one of the things which is slightly weird about the sensory systems is what happens just before you make a creative leap. Is the brain actually shuts down sensory input. So it stops processing visual information. There's a moment, there's a glitch moment, just before you come to a creative thought, where it just stops processing. And then, so visual processing back there, and part of the brain over here starts having that moment where creativity exists. So the brain uses gaps. They're fundamental to how we architect the future of ourselves. So, fine. What I think I need to just put across at the moment is understand that narrative is nice. I have nothing against narrative as an architectural format, but it is a demand. Make sure that people agree to it, or at least you make space for them. And make gaps. Gaps really matter. Don't think about content. It's very easy to think just see the thing, but sometimes the thing isn't the thing. The thing is the not thing, and it's the gap. And that's something that people forget. That is the map, which we finally did. That's the key, which I haven't really had lots of time to explain. And that is the map in physical position in the Imperial War Museum. And that's the end.